welcome to the Bruno e Linzio Transmission, episode number 3. While our first episode is now over 1,000 views, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Ciao di nuovo, Bruno.
Ciao Linzio, come stai?
Sto bene, sto bene. Il grande Bruno di Milano.
Il magnifico Linzio della Nuova Zelanda.
Oh, grazie, grazie. Bel giovane Bruno. Quindi andiamo episodio 3 in inglese.
Yes.
Not quite ready for a whole program in Italian yet. Ma 10 su 10 per il mio italiano questa settimana.
Yes, I think it's a 10 this time also.
10, 10, bene, bene. Ah,
You're
I would have had to say che peccato if you didn't give me 10 out of 10.
So what's on your mind this week, Linzio?
Well, you're supposed to ask me what's on my body. Haven't you noticed this super garish yellow shirt and the orange t-shirt?
Yeah.
Now, have you any idea why I'm wearing these colors?
I suspect it has something to do with another old objectivist. Not that you're old.
Thank you. Well, that one said he looks 210. I hope I'm not quite that old, but yes, you're quite right. Leonard Peikoff, they've just put up, the Ayn Rand Institute, a new interview with Leonard Peikoff that he recorded for Orcon 2018 because his health is rather precarious and he wasn't confident that he could physically be present for the conference. So he recorded this message, and he's wearing a yellow shirt like this and a yellow t-shirt. This is orange, as you can tell. And I thought, and the interviewer complimented him on being a fashion plate. He also had yellow sneakers. I thought, well, I can do that, and Bruno might call me a fashion plate. So I found this 25-year-old Ralph Lauren shirt, and I did find a yellow t-shirt, but as you can see, it's
That's no
like
good.
it's past its use-by date. So the next best thing I could come up with was an orange t-shirt. But I have to say,
Yeah, that looks very straight, the orange and the yellow.
straight, not a word one would normally apply in my case. But I have to say I enjoyed seeing Leonard so relaxed and flamboyant and happy. I loved seeing all his artwork. If I were to turn this camera around, you would see very similar artists on my wall, Michelangelo and Caravaggio. Oh, there's a fellow called Dixie who did marvelous balcony kiss scene from Romeo and Juliet, and so many more. Goya, when reason sleeps, monsters awake. And that's been so apparent this week, which is the main thing I wanted to talk about, but we can mainly get to that in a minute. I just wanted to say that over my shoulder here, I'm not sure if you can see it on your camera, but there's a photograph roundabout on a level with where my finger is now. That is me, that is I and Leonard in a New York restaurant about 35 years ago. We had dinner together one night. That was our introduction, and that was at his instigation. I don't know what the restaurant was. He booked it. He paid for the meal. And from my vantage point, it was delightful. It probably wasn't so delightful for him because at that stage I knew next to nothing about objectivism. The first question he asked me was, had I read the epistemology book? And of course I hadn't. I didn't know what epistemology was. Episto what? But he had wanted to meet me because I had set up an interview with him from New Zealand with my then mentor at our equivalent in New Zealand of your NPR in a feature on objectivism, which we recorded. In about 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes of that feature was this interview with Leonard Peikoff, which I had set up. And in the process of setting it up, he and I had talked quite a bit, and he finally said, I'd quite like to meet you. And I said, well, funny you should say that. I'm actually coming over for the very first, the inaugural conference of what was then the Thomas Jefferson School, set up by George and Edith Reisman in California. But I said, I'll come over to New York to meet you beforehand if that's convenient. He said, sure. And so that's how that dinner occurred. And as far as I'm concerned, although Solo exists in part to counter the Ayn Rand Institute, which I think has gone awry, I think that if they had let Leonard be Leonard, it would not have gone awry. And I think that the reason he's now so relaxed and happy, he's free of the influence of Harry Binswanger and Peter Schwartz and people like that associated with the Institute. That's just speculation on my part. But I linked to the interview on Solo, and I put up the very mischievous subject header, Leonard Peikoff defects to Solo. My point being that in sense of life terms, Solo, after all, being sense of life objectivist, Leonard is with us. He's not with the ARI, and he's very welcome to formally join us anytime he wants to. Yellow shirt, yellow t-shirt, yellow sneakers, the lot. So what have you been thinking about?
Well, so you're not, you haven't been impressed by the latest Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand Institute CEO? You haven't been impressed by his sense of life? You don't think he belongs on Solo? Because that's what I watched last night, his presentation at OCON of the future of the objectivist community and so forth.
Well, isn't that a funny thing? I did. I saw that. It's only been up a couple of days, right? So
Yeah.
you must have spotted it at around the time I did. But I could only get to about 2 minutes in when he started talking about his journey. And, you know, that are they coming to get you, Bruno?
Oh dear, they are indeed.
What took them
Live.
so long? What took them so long? Yeah, when he started talking about his journey, as soon as anyone talks about his journey, especially if they're talking about having a conversation about their journey, that's just human resources department claptrap. And I thought, well, this is exactly what I've suspected. It's part of how orgoism has become subsumed by obleftivism. That it's all this weasel-worded my journey and my path, and Ayn Rand would have hated that. And there's a famous video, which probably is, now that they're putting all her original talks up on YouTube, which is great. That's the one good thing ARI is doing. But there's one, I think it's called What Capitalism Is, something like that. And she talks about, she calls them the ghastly, that's her word, ghastly PR people within mobile. And she was talking about their current advertising campaign at the time, where they use that sort of language. It's been around for a while, but not particularly from the ARI, but now it is. They're talking about their journeys and having conversations and all the rest. They're just masturbating. It's sickening. So I saw 2 minutes of that guy, and I'm afraid that was all I could take. But I understand it's very clever because they're switching on to the current fashionable gurus even though they dismiss the so-called alt-right, they're latching on to all the gurus within whatever the alt-right is, and they're probably paying them to appear with Yawan Book and what's his name, Greg, from the ARI, and they get tens of thousands of views, which of course normally they can't do at all. If you put Yawan Book on his own, he gets a few hundred on a good day. So this new guy with his conversations and his paths and his journeys, I mean, marketing-wise, it probably all makes sense, but I'm afraid there'll be nothing left of objectivism when it's all over. So you watched the whole thing?
I did, of course, at 2 times speed. That's my rule with the leftivists. You always have to speed it up, or else too much of that information for too long can hurt your neurons. Well, I just find it hilarious when people talk about their journey, making millions and millions of dollars, and then at the end of the talk, they're like, "Oh, and by the way, please give us money," and insistently so, just over and over again. You know, because it's so funny, because objectivists, so they're all in for the money, right? So it's really funny asking for money, and they make a huge deal out of this. But again, I don't see why I should give money to someone who has tens of millions of dollars in the bank. I see no reason whatsoever in doing that. And also, I don't agree with the ARI strategy or with what they're putting out, so they're definitely not getting any money from me. I do agree that it's a good thing that they're putting out the original Ayn Rand stuff, the old recordings, also from Peikoff and so forth. That's very good, and it's very good that they're putting it on YouTube, and that's what I was making fun of a few weeks ago. That they spent millions and millions of dollars on this website, or however much money that was, and it was all to funnel people in. You could funnel them into this Ayn Rand campus, which I know that Michael Paxton is working overtime on. And the simple reality is they're all putting this stuff on YouTube because that's the only way to get it out, really. So they spent millions of dollars on something that, at the end of the day, not so useful. And they're going to spend millions more now on a telephone app, or on a smartphone app, and again, I don't see much value in that unless it's, as you said, this new marketing strategy. But as far as his journey and so forth, yeah, I'm not too impressed with that. I thought it was a little cringy. As they say, as the young people say, I'm one of those. It was a little cringy.
Millennials, do they say cringy, do they?
Yes.
Yeah, cringy, that's a very good word, but I didn't give myself much opportunity to cringe because once I got to conversation and path and journey, I'd already cringed enough. What I found lacking in the small part that I watched was any sense of moral outrage as to what is happening at the moment. And what is happening at the moment has been especially egregious in the last week or fortnight or so. I think the last time we spoke, Brett Kavanaugh had just been confirmed. But since then, there have been a number of events and a number of statements from the left. Now, remember that leftivism endorses Democrats. It says don't vote, above all, don't vote for Donald Trump because he's the enemy of Western civilization. Islam is a mere mosquito bite, according to Yawan Book. And what one should do is vote Democrats. Well, the Democrats who've been on display, first of all, Hillary herself, for whom I don't doubt Yawan Book voted, and some of those others, I think Greg, you mentioned, has been one of them, admitted quite openly to voting for Hillary.
That was Jonathan, but maybe Greg also. Maybe Greg also. I'm not sure.
Well, they all in principle say that the number one thing you have to do is take down Trump because he's the enemy of Western civilization. So, and what Yuan said prior to the last election was Donald Trump needs to lose heavily. Well, what he's saying is vote Hillary. Now, those not-for-profit organizations are not supposed to be propagandizing politically, but that was political propaganda, and he's been engaged in political propaganda against Trump ever since. But here was Hillary this week saying, we can't have civility, you can't be civil to people who are opposed to your ideas. When the Democrats win back the House and or the Senate, then we can have civility again. That's what Hillary Clinton said. Where was Yawan on that? Because that's an open invitation or incitement of violence by Hillary Clinton. She's openly saying, yes, I can see the mob, and they won't let you use that word, but I can see the mob in Portland, Oregon. I can see the mob in New York attacking the Republican Party headquarters. And what I'm saying is we have to expect this because you can't have civility until the Democrats get the House and or the Senate back. Nancy Pelosi was saying, I don't understand why there aren't uprisings all over America. Eric Holder said, when they go low, we kick them. We kick them. Supposedly in contrast to Michelle Obama saying, when they go low, we go high. Eric Holder said, no, when they go low, we kick them. Now, this has all been going on in the space of the last week. And in a way, I'm delighted that those evil, evil people, whom I call subhuman, oh, I know you balk at that expression, but going back to the interview with Leonard in the yellow shirt, one of the things he says, and I thought of you immediately, he's talking about Phyllis Raskin, his favorite sculptress, but he says one of the great things about her is she's a great admirer of human beings insofar as they're human. So I'm going to shamelessly invoke the argument from authority. Leonard agrees with me. There is human and there's subhuman. Hillary Clinton is subhuman. Nancy Pelosi is subhuman. Eric Holder is subhuman. All of these people advocating violence and refusing to countenance not only an opposing argument, but any argument at all. They refuse to engage in argument. And that is one of the distinguishing features of human beings, is the capacity to engage in argument, discussion, and rational debate. They eschew that totally. So I'm afraid to report, I regret to report, I don't. I'm proud to report I shall continue to talk about humans and subhumans. And now that we've got that out of the way, you can perhaps make your own comment on what I've just said.
Yeah, that was a pretty convincing argument, or from authority, indeed. But again, I've told myself I'm gonna be civil. No, I wouldn't. I would never use that word. Actually, I simply do not use. I don't want to use bad language as it is. In some kind of old Southern fashion. We don't like using bad words in public. Now, if you invite me for a beer on Saturday night, then maybe some bad words might come out. But if it's a public transmission, as it is, the Bruno e Linzio transmission, then I shall avoid such words. As far as the Democrats, I really don't have anything to add to that. I think we should take them at their word. They don't want to be civil. Very well. Then the Republicans should simply not listen. just win the House, win this midterm election. You have the votes. Go through with whatever you need to go through with. Just go through with the legislation. Don't even speak to the Democrats if this is the situation. The Democrats don't want to be civil. All right, fine. You're out of the game.
Yeah, and I think that the Republicans have tried to be civil for far too long, but I think they have in the last couple of weeks, and through the Kavanaugh episode, they've grown a spine and grown spectacles, testicles, I mean. The issue is, will these phenomena remain for long enough to carry the Republicans through the election? Because I think that if they can maintain their spine and their testicles up until the midterms, then they will win overwhelmingly. That's what Trump's base and so many other decent, commonsensical Americans want. What it comes down to, I think, you remember Ayn Rand saying, and if it's a battle between the civilized man and the savage, you side with the civilized man. To be a civilized man does not require that you be an objectivist, much less a card-carrying member of the Ayn Rand Institute. I would argue that might actually be incompatible with being a civilized man. But there are certain basic values that are given in a civilized, genuinely human being, as Leonard would say, insofar as they are human. And those people, they're probably still in the majority in the American electorate, but they won't turn up if they just get weasel words from the Republicans. And I think the Republicans have finally realized this. As I understand it, there's going to be a bill brought in just before the midterms to provide funding for the wall and to end chain migration and to end the lottery system. Alleluia! What has taken so long? And I've been disappointed with Trump that he kind of lost momentum on what I would say is the number one reason he was elected was to build the wall. They're not, the people at his rallies, which are tremendous, even though he says the same thing each time, over and over. I watch them all just to reassure myself when you see tens of thousands of people chanting USA, 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 and genuinely enthused by the fact that America is back. I watch those and I think, they're not chanting 4.2% GDP, 4.2% GDP. They're chanting, build that wall, or lock her up, which is number two reason, I would say, that he was elected. And he should deliver on that as well. Get rid of Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein, all these weasels whose presence, inexplicably to me, he's continued to tolerate. So what I'm hoping, and I'm a little bit more optimistic now that this will occur, is that it'll be a red wave and then Trump will get rid of the weasels. And
yeah. I really like the analogy with the civilized and the uncivilized. You always side with the civilized. I think that applies perfectly to the 2016 election and to the upcoming election even more. That's perfect. Again, they're not civil. They even say they don't want to be civil. So what more do you need to hear? As far as the wall, yes, we are all waiting desperately for that. And I would say even more importantly, I know it might be more difficult to get past and so forth, but he needs to find a way to end the so-called birthright citizenship, because the what is properly called anchor baby, of course, because all children of American citizens have birthright citizenship. That's what it really is. And this Mexicans just jumping over the border and popping out babies, that's an anchor baby. So he definitely needs to get rid of that before it's too late. Again, the demographics of California, as we know, have long been out of reach of any rationality, and I don't want to see the same thing happening to Texas, Georgia, Florida, and so forth.
May I quote again? I think it's very pertinent with the midterms approaching. The aforementioned Leonard Peikoff. Do you remember when he had that extraordinary outburst of lucidity and rationality in 2013 and departed from the party line, which was vote Democrat across the board? Do you remember? And he said this, I will quote. At that time, there was an immigration bill being proposed by the so-called Gang of Eight, who included people like Marco Rubio, unimaginable. This is Leonard Peikoff, 2013. I am against the immigration bill 100%, not just one clause or another, for one very simple reason. It happens to be the case that we are teetering on the edge of dictatorship. It happens to be the case that if the Democrats continue to have or grow their political power, we will be over the edge. And it happens to be the case, whether you like it or not, that of all Hispanics in America, whether they're rich or poor, self-made men or anything else, 80% are reliably and continually Democrat. So if you were talking about a bill, I don't care whether it's fair, unfair, in any other respects. You're talking about a bill that will infuse into this country a massive amount of Democrat supporters and thereby guarantee the destruction of this country. That is what immigration means today. And there's no use asking me in theory, what do I think? There is no theory now. We're on the end. So it's a question of buying time. Leonard Peikoff, where did you go? Leonard Peikoff, come to Solo. Say this thing. As opposed to that, we've got Harry Binswanger, who says all these dinky little savages from shithole countries have the inalienable intrinsic right to migrate to any country they want to, because they're human beings, which is another reason I insist. They're not necessarily human. We must make that conceptual demarcation. Rand's razor, talk about argument from authority. Remember she said, keep your concepts to a minimum. We just need two, human and subhuman. Of all the people, all the entities... You just won't let
this go, will you? You just won't let this go, will you?
Don't let it go.
Oh dear. Well, let's remind everyone that Harry Binswanger has invented this wonderful new right, this right to travel. You have a right to travel. Oh, I want to travel all over the world. Then Harry Binswanger is the man for you. He'll guarantee a right to that. So I would say that's...
It's not just he's guaranteeing it. It's inalienable. It's intrinsic. By dint of the fact that you biologically are a human being, it doesn't matter where you are on Earth, what shithole country you come from, with whatever dreadful totalitarian or tribalistic custom, you've got the right to march on in, just because you resemble a human being in your physical form. Now, I know that Leonard knows that that's bullshit. So I'm astonished that in this recent interview, for example, in the yellow shirt, that he didn't talk about it. But then again, he didn't talk about politics at all. I would recommend everyone go see the interview. It's wonderful, it's endearing, it's inspiring. But there's so much more one would wish to hear from him, and not from Yvonne Book or Harry Binswanger.
Yes, well, the talk by Tal Safani that I watched last night, it was put up, the various CEOs that have gone through the history of ARI, and Yvonne Book was chosen in 2000, so that's a long time ago, and he's had plenty of time to establish his dominion over the situation. As is clear, and I bring this up specifically because Leonard Peikoff, because of that Leonard Peikoff rant, and because of the so-called debate that he had with Yaron Brook on this subject, where at the end of the day, Leonard Peikoff simply accepted that Yaron Brook had better data. So simply, Leonard Peikoff, at the end of the day, that rant that you read, Lindsay, is nothing more than fake news, because he was listening to bad old conservative talk show hosts. That's the excuse, the explanation that an leftist would give. Of course,
Well,
the reality is that we know that both Yaron Brook and that terrible Harry Binswanger piece on open immigration, they are the ones propagating fake news. The fake news that immigrants commit less crime, fake news that immigrants are better Americans than the Americans. That is the fake news.
Self-selected for virtue. Self-selected for virtue.
Yeah, and also, of course, it's self-selected for virtue. This just ineffable metaphysical force that selects these immigrants because they're so virtuous. All of them, of course, better than Americans.
Yes. Well, you see, Leonard having to do that, to go before Yawan and Amy and capitulate, that was the equivalent of Galileo going before the Inquisition. That had to happen, and it was all, I'm sure, set up in advance. Leonard would put up token resistance, a little bit like what Galileo uttered under his breath, but he, in essence, capitulated, and that's back in 2013. But that whole intrinsicist view of the inherent virtue and the inherent rights of dinky little savages, it reminds me of Plato, and I know you wanted to talk about that tonight, but I heard the bell go, and we made a solemn pledge not to bore people witless past 30 minutes. So we should end here, and maybe next week you'll kick off with Plato's Republic.
Sounds good to me.
Ebbene. Well, in the meantime, 3, 2, 1, Moga!
Moga, everyone. Make objectivism great again.
Sì, sì. Buonanotte, Bruno.
It's buongiorno for me. I just woke up. Thank you very
Sì.
much.
Giorno.
And it's buonanotte
Giorno.
for you. Buonanotte.